Yeah, thanks for joining us. Hey, what's the weather like over there in the Rio Grande Valley?
Not too bad. Pretty cloudy, kind of a reprieve from the heat that we usually have. So, enjoyable for those who like a little bit of dark, cloudy weather, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, here in Tucson, we've been like 15 degrees above average.
Yeah.
This is like our second winter now where it's, you know, almost 80 every day.
Mm, sure.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we can't complain when you see everybody under these massive snowstorms in the east and north,
Right.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But you did a really informative piece on Tuesday about what people with DACA are facing right now as Trump's deportation dragnet expands. Could you talk a little bit about the piece that you published on Tuesday?
Sure. I mean, I actually interviewed a person here in the Rio Grande Valley who does have DACA. They're protected by the deferred action policy. Um, and they told me their family story, a story of a family who is mixed status. Um, his dad brought the family over here after working several years on a shrimping boat with an H-2A work visa, work authorization. And I go into a little bit more detail in the story about, how they struggled over the years and what how it became necessary to bring the family over here. And the person that I interviewed, who has DACA now and is completely authorized to be in the US at the moment. There's somebody who's looking at the news, who is watching the DACA arrests of US citizens, DACA recipients.
Hmm.
We're seeing reports of these people who are supposed to be protected from detainment by ICE, in detention. So we talked about that, and the story was his family story. Talked about the DACA policy, and talked about basically a more specific case of what we're seeing broadly in the Trump administration's effort to deport millions of people, which is that a lot of folks are being swept up who legally should. It looks like they shouldn't.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a really disturbing piece because you explain this person who does have legal status has watched their all of their family members be detained and deported over the last few years, right? Including her, including the mother and
Sure.
everything. Yeah. Um,
About 10 years ago, his mom was deported in 2016. That was 10 years ago, and the rest of the family, he saw them being deported one by one, and had to basically navigate the unpredictable process of getting advanced parole to be able to go see his family in Mexico, come back without losing that DACA protection. And so like I mentioned before, I mean, there's a lot more details in the story because it's a long story, and I didn't expect it to be such a heavy story. It really was. But it's not an uncommon story. I mean, there's many mixed status families that go through similar situations, that are going through similar situations, and of course, we have thousands of DACA recipients here in the region. And I'll share with you that one of the reasons I decided to do this interview was because I've heard from more than one DACA person
mm.
that they are basically living in a state of fear, of trauma, just seeing what is going on. The person I did an interview with, they haven't left the county in a few months. They travel for necessities only and don't really venture out too far. That's something that I've heard from people in other stories that we've published on the Border Chronicle this year. So, again, a specific case of something going on more broadly, in this case, DACA recipients here in the Rio Grande Valley.
Yeah, and for folks just joining us, I mean, do you wanna give a brief of what DACA is, just in case folks don't know that are listening to this video, watching it?
Sure. I mean, it's a temporary policy that was put in place in 2012 for people who were brought here to the United States as children. So These are people who speak our language, they've learned our culture, they're American in every way, they just don't have that, little piece of paper. They were raised here, and now, many of them are adults. The policy temporarily, defers any kind of deportation action, one, and the other thing this does is it gives these, individuals a work permit so that they're able to work and have a life. This is something that had a lot of bipartisan support when it was put in place, and it's something that surprisingly, and I look back at the history of this, going back a long time, and it's something that hasn't been able to really pass in Congress as something permanent.
Mhm.
And then, actually just this week, if I'm not mistaken, it was either this week or last week, the Democrats, again, put out on the floor, or what will end up being on the floor, the DREAM Act, which they do this every single session. And they've been doing this for a long time now, many years. And for some technical reason or another, it has not been made permanent. And the other detail is, historically, it's had a lot of Republican support. Even as late as Trump's last, term, there were Republicans on their own, writing letters about how making DACA permanent was the right thing to do. But now in this, Trump administration, a lot of that has changed. And so with Trump's effort now to, really bring deportations up to another level, Republicans, we're not seeing that level of support from that side of the aisle anymore.
Yeah, yeah, that's too bad, and your I think your piece, the one that you published on Tuesday, does a really good job of explaining the complexity of mixed status families, and there are so many in this country, and, especially, in South Texas where you live, it was very notable because you did a breakdown of DACA recipients in, the Rio Grande Valley, in San Antonio, El Paso, and the highest number were in the valley. So
Sure.
that was very interesting how a lot of these mixed status families are really feeling, persecuted now in the valley, and as you said, the person that you wrote about hasn't left Hidalgo County in months, right?
Right.
Yeah,
It's a very difficult situation. I mean, from everything that I've looked at, it just seems like maybe if there are cases of of whole families all getting the same status to come to the US and be together, I think probably is extremely rare. In this
right.
case, the dad had H-2A authorization. Those people can come. They can bring their families, but the employers can't provide housing for them. They're not authorized to work. So when you bring them, what happens to the children? They need work authorization. Then they can get DACA, but the parents can't get DACA because they're a different age. So you have all these different statuses and difficulties, across the family, and different statuses, can last different amounts of time. They can be canceled, they can be renewed. So a very difficult process. And yes, I have break that down in the article,
Mhm.
and how it affects this particular family story.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanna segue to Thursday. I published we published a podcast conversation I had with Jeremiah Johnson, and he was an immigration judge until late November in San Francisco, and he also handled cases at the Eloy Detention Facility, which is just north of Tucson, where I live. And on November 21st, he was, fired by email without cause by the Department of Justice. At least 15 judges were fired, in November in California and New York. And since Trump took office, more than 100 judges, immigration judges, have been fired. Um, and, so the immigration system, which is already like Swiss cheese, is now, further deteriorating. For instance, in the San Francisco immigration courts, there were 21 judges at the beginning of the Trump administration, and there are now just 9 judges left. So for every judge that gets fired,
Well,
they have these. large thousands and thousands of cases that they're handling now, both of detained and non-detained folks. And so for every judge that gets fired, those cases get sent to the remaining judges and the backlog grows. We now have a immigration case backlog of about 3.4 million,
Oh,
which
wow.
is crazy. Yeah. And so we had a very interesting conversation. Jeremiah Johnson, he was appointed during Trump's first administration in 2017, so he's an experienced immigration judge. He was an asylum officer under DHS, and he says what he believes is happening is that, the administration is just trying to circumvent judges and due process, altogether. And, he also said there seemed to be no rhyme or reason as to why he and other judges were fired, in November. The first wave of judges that were fired had been recently hired. They were in a probationary period, so
Mm,
I guess it made more sense. But with these judges, they were all very experienced and, some were like former military. He was Johnson was appointed during the first Trump administration. Um, so he's saying it's really unclear as to why this latest round of judges, were laid off, or fired. Um, and then in the meantime, the DOJ is now advertising for deportation judges, I'll put that in quotes, uh,
right.
and they're deploying military, personnel to hear immigration cases, which, some experts say could violate posse comitatus, which prohibits the military from getting involved in domestic, enforcement and policy. Um, so yeah, so it's a very interesting conversation with him. He's very candid. He's a very experienced judge, and he really liked his job. I was actually surprised how much he liked being an immigration judge.
Sure.
It just seems like it'd be incredibly difficult, to me, and to have such a huge backlog of, thousands of cases,
Right.
uh, that you're trying to get through. But he said he just felt like, of course, America needs a working immigration system. It needs due process. It needs, to treat people with dignity and respect. So he said he really was committed to that. And so yeah, so it's just very unfortunate, as we have this huge backlog that we have fewer and fewer judges, and it really just seems like the administration just wants to rubber stamp deportations as fast as it can. Um, Along the lines of the military, being involved in domestic policy, the Department of the Interior announced this week that they're creating a new national defense area. This is a militarized zone, at the border, and this one is going to be at the California border in San Diego and Imperial counties. Um, and you know all about national defense areas, right, Pablo? Because you live in one in the Rio Grande Valley. And I guess
Right.
they were just putting up a bunch of floating buoys on the Rio Grande with no trespassing signs as part of this, national defense area in South Texas. What's happening there?
Well, they've laid a few buoys into the water. We saw some of that, and just to give the full context for people who don't know, the entire Rio Grande in the counties of the Rio Grande Valley is now a national defense area. So the eventual plan that the administration is working on is a full border wall on land and also a full barrier in the water made up of buoys. And I know that we are going to see a lot more of the buoys we saw during Operation Lone Star, which is those big circular orange buoys that have the
The
and
razor
there
blades,
was
right? The
I
saw
mean,
blades.
there was so
Yeah.
much in the media arguing about what to call them, but they basically look like saw blades,
Mhm.
and they're meant to deter people from being able to cross that barrier. So I think you can take it from there. We did see some cases of people being injured there during Operation Lone Star. Whether they're designed to do that or not, again, very controversial. But now what we're moving towards is a large expansion of that across the Rio Grande. One of the things, and I spoke to a few people about this, that's a little bit misunderstood is the Operation Lone Star buoys, they covered a small piece of the river, and I think people thought it was
Mhm.
big
Yeah,
because of how focused the media was in that one little spot.
right, and this is in
Um,
Eagle Pass, right?
in Eagle Pass, right?
Originally, yeah.
What is happening now, and that was a tiny piece. What's happening now is much larger in scale, and they want to create a barrier that eventually will cover the whole Rio Grande, both on land and on water. Huge pieces of it, eventually. So that's the beginning of what we're seeing now. And I know that we've also got military water vehicles patrolling the Rio Grande. I saw some photographs published yesterday
Mm.
by, I believe it was Texas General Land Office. Sid Miller dropped by to basically to say hello and take some photos with some of the military personnel that are patrolling those waters. And so we got to see some images of that, some of the weapons they have on these boats. So this is armed personnel that we can see in these photos. Um, and so that's the buildup. It's the buildup that's happening here in the Rio Grande, and it's a buildup that we're seeing on various parts of the U.S. Mexico border.
Even though crossings at the border are at an all-time low, um, in terms of
Right,
undocumented crossings. I mean,
right. And we've been looking at that. We've been looking at the unexplainability of why there's such a huge military buildup at the border. I think, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, and I know maybe a few analysts they've mentioned it on Twitter and so forth, but haven't really put out any big papers on it. Is the new national security strategy that puts Latin America
mm,
basically front and center of our security strategy. A lot of the comments from the experts are basically saying, just to put it briefly, if we go into Venezuela, if we begin having military action in South American countries, more migration is likely to happen. A lot of the stuff we're talking about in that security strategy is very likely to cause mass migration again, like the kind we saw under Biden. That was due to mostly a lot of disastrous weather and very high prices due to the war in Ukraine at that time. It was a huge mass of people who necessarily had to migrate. And I reported some of that for NPR at the time. Um, but without getting too much into the weeds now, I think that we're beginning to see that the military buildup at the border may have something to do with a larger national security strategy that includes Mexico and Latin America.
yeah, I mean, and this is right as we're entering a renegotiation over NAFTA, which is not called
Right.
NAFTA anymore, but we're entering, the renegotiation over that, and then there's also the US-Mexico Water Treaty, right? Where both countries need to agree on changes such as border wall construction or these buoys being put in the river because it can divert the water, flood communities on the Mexican side, but, the US has been acting unilaterally really without Mexico's agreement to all of this. So, yeah, so I think like you're saying, this is all gonna really continue to heat up over the coming months, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned trade. And so the policy that replaced NAFTA is called USMCA, and it gets renegotiated between Mexico, US, and Canada next year. And I
Yeah.
think I think that next year, and what a lot of analysts are saying is that next year is going to be a very intense, busy, complicated year, politically complicated year in the whole Western Hemisphere because, just like you said, they're going to be renegotiating that entire North American trade bloc at the same time that they're instilling this new national security strategy, and so it's going to be very interesting how those two things, the border security, water on the border, all of these things are going actually to come together. They're gonna intersect in a big way in those trade negotiations worth trillions of dollars,
Mm.
and involve a lot of multinational private investment. So, um, we'll see what happens with all of those, questions next year
Oh, and you gotta throw in the midterms too, Pablo.
and the
Oh,
midterms,
yes.
yeah.
There's gonna be some over the top rhetoric. Get ready. It's just
Sure.
it's gonna be a wild year.
It
Yeah,
will, yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah.
think so.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining us for the Border Chronicle Weekly Roundup live video, and I'll post the full roundup today after this video, and that'll have links to our stories and to important stories from across the region, including this new national defense area in California. And you can always check out more of our work at theborderchronicle.com. And thanks so much, Pablo, for
Thank you.
joining this morning. And thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Bye.